It started with a wrong turn. Not a metaphorical one, but an actual, literal wrong turn on the way home from work. I was supposed to head left onto Maple Street, but traffic was a mess, so I cut through a back road instead. That's where I saw it, Diane's car. It was parked outside a restaurant on the edge of town, the kind of place you go for candlelit dinners, not casual meetings. At first, I laughed. The idea of Diane sneaking off for some secret rendezvous was ridiculous. This was Diane, my wife of 15 years, the mother of my 2 daughters, and the person who had stuck with me through everything. But then I saw her walk out of the restaurant. She wasn't alone. The man she was with wasn't anyone I recognized. He was tall, sharply dressed, and had the kind of easy confidence that screamed, "Not her husband." Diane was smiling, no, glowing, like she used to back when we were still in the honeymoon phase. I sat there in my car, frozen. Maybe it was a business dinner, I told myself. But when she leaned in, touched his arm, and laughed at something he said, it felt like someone had punched me in the chest. I knew I shouldn't have followed them, but how could I not? I kept my distance, trying to piece together what I was seeing. They strolled down the sidewalk like a couple from a romantic movie, and I was the uncredited extra watching it all unfold. When they ducked into a boutique hotel, my blood turned cold. I sat in my car for an hour. 2 hours. Long enough to know I couldn't ignore this. Long enough to realize that the life I thought I knew might not be as solid as I believed. By the time I drove home, I wasn't sure what I felt: anger, disbelief, shame. All I knew was that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I didn't sleep that night. I tried, God knows I tried. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, with Diane's side of the bed unoccupied. She'd texted earlier, claiming she'd been caught up at work and would stay at her sister's house to avoid driving late. Her words sat in my inbox, each one tightening the noose around my chest. I couldn't reply. What could I even say? Morning came, and with it, the heavy realization that I needed answers. I couldn't ignore what I'd seen. But if I went at this blindly, she'd deny it or twist it somehow, and I'd be left looking like the paranoid husband. I needed to be sure, to know exactly what I was dealing with before I made a move. So, I did something I never thought I'd do: I started to follow her. Diane's routines weren't hard to track. She worked predictable hours, spent weekends ferrying our daughters to their activities, and made time for the occasional girls' night. But once I started paying closer attention, cracks began to appear. On 3 separate occasions that week, she came home late, citing meetings. On Friday, she left for the gym at her usual time but came back 2 hours later than usual, her hair still perfectly styled. No sweat, no exhaustion, just that same radiant smile I'd seen at the restaurant. The breaking point came the following Saturday. Diane said she had an out-of-town work seminar and wouldn't be back until Sunday evening. She packed an overnight bag, kissed me on the cheek like everything was normal, and left. My stomach churned as I watched her car disappear down the street. I gave her a 30-minute head start before following. I hadn't decided what I'd do if I found her with someone else, but I had to know. She drove to a different part of town, pulling into the parking lot of a mid-range hotel. Nothing flashy, nothing that screamed affair, but that was the point, wasn't it? Keep it discreet. She checked in quickly, barely glancing over her shoulder as she wheeled her suitcase inside. I parked a block away and sat there, running through my options. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel. Do I storm in? Call her and demand an explanation? But then what? No, I needed evidence. Proof that this wasn't just some crazy misunderstanding. Proof that could hold up in an argument when she inevitably tried to gaslight me. I walked into the hotel, trying to act casual. The receptionist barely looked up as I pretended to browse the brochures by the front desk. Diane wasn't in the lobby or bar, so I lingered by the elevators, waiting to see where they might take her. She never came back down. The hours ticked by, and with every passing minute, my resolve hardened. I wasn't going home until I knew the truth. Around 8 p.m., my patience paid off. A delivery driver walked in with a bag of food, and the receptionist called up to a room number, 214. My heart raced as I waited, unsure of what I'd do if I saw her emerge. It wasn't Diane who came down, but him. The same man from the restaurant. He was dressed casually this time, but the air of confidence was unmistakable. He grabbed the food, exchanged pleasantries with the receptionist, and took the elevator back up without a second glance. I left shortly after, my head spinning. It was one thing to suspect, it was another to see it unfold in real time. I drove home in silence, parked in the driveway, and sat there until my hands stopped shaking. The house was quiet when I went inside. The girls were already asleep, and the evidence of their day, a stray sock here, an unfinished glass of juice there, was the only sign of life. I wondered how long it had been since Diane had genuinely participated in moments like these, and the thought made my chest ache. When Diane returned the next evening, she acted like everything was normal. She kissed the girls, asked about their weekend, and chatted with me about her seminar. Her ability to lie so smoothly, to act like nothing was wrong, left me feeling sick. But I played along, knowing my confrontation had to be planned, deliberate. For the next week, I couldn't look at her the same way. Every smile, every touch felt rehearsed, part of some elaborate performance she'd perfected over God knows how long. I started staying late at work just to avoid coming home. When I was there, I barely spoke to her, and when she asked if everything was okay, I lied right back. Just stressed from work, I'd say. Diane didn't press further, and why would she? She had other distractions. By Thursday, I'd reached my breaking point. It was like living with a stranger, one who had infiltrated my life and stolen the woman I married. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. That night, after the girls were in bed, I sat Diane down in the living room. The weight of what I was about to say pressed against my chest like a boulder. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice low and steady. Diane's smile faltered, and for a split second, her expression betrayed her. Shock, fear, and then, just as quickly, a calculated calmness. She crossed her arms and leaned back on the couch, her face a mask of indifference. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her tone almost bored. "You know exactly what I'm talking about," I said, my voice rising. "The man at the restaurant. The man at the hotel." Her composure cracked, and she started stammering. You're mistaken. I don't know what you think you saw, but..." "Don't lie to me, Diane." I snapped. "I saw you with him. I followed you to the hotel. I know everything." She froze, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The confident, polished woman I'd married was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. She muttered something about work obligations and networking, but the excuses were weak, transparent. "Stop," I said, cutting her off. "I don't want to hear another word. You owe me the truth. Right now." Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I thought she might actually come clean. But instead, she doubled down, insisting it was nothing, that I was blowing things out of proportion. That was the moment I realized she wasn't going to admit to anything unless I forced her hand. And force her hand, I would. I stared at Diane, my heart pounding in my chest as she fumbled for words. This was it, the moment I had been dreading and preparing for all at once. She had always been a quick thinker, but tonight, her usual confidence was replaced by a desperate scramble to control the situation. It was almost pitiful to watch. "You're wrong," she said finally, her voice trembling. "You're misunderstanding what you saw. It wasn't..." "Stop," I interrupted, my voice sharp and unyielding. "I followed you to the restaurant. I saw you with him. I saw him come down to get food from the lobby while you were in the hotel room. So don't sit here and insult me by pretending this is something innocent." She blinked rapidly, as though trying to process how much I actually knew. Her face twisted into something between defiance and fear. "Okay, yes, I had dinner with him," she admitted, her voice rising defensively. "But it wasn't what you think. He's a colleague. We were discussing a project. That's all." "A project that needed a hotel room?" I shot back. "Do I look like an idiot to you?" Her lips tightened, and for a brief moment, she said nothing. Then she stood up abruptly, as though trying to assert control. I don't have to sit here and be interrogated like a criminal, she snapped. I've done nothing wrong. You've done nothing wrong? I repeated, standing up to meet her at eye level. Then why don't you explain why you lied about the seminar? Why you've been sneaking around for weeks? Why you suddenly have all these late nights and excuses that don't add up? Diane's face turned red, her hands balled into fists at her sides. I don't have to explain every detail of my life to you, she yelled. God, you're so controlling. I can't even have a conversation with a male colleague without you jumping to conclusions. This isn't about jealousy, Diane, I said, my voice cold. This is about trust. And right now, you're giving me every reason not to trust you. She scoffed, shaking her head. You're paranoid. You've always been paranoid. Maybe that's the real issue here, not me, not anything I've done, but your constant need to control everything. I laughed bitterly, unable to believe what I was hearing. You're seriously trying to turn this around on me? After everything I've done for this family, after the life we've built together, you think I'm the problem? Maybe you are, she shot back, her voice cracking. You're so wrapped up in your own little world that you don't even see what I've been going through. Do you ever ask how I'm feeling? What I need? Or are you too busy playing the victim? Her words stung, but I wasn't about to let her shift the blame. What you need? I repeated, incredulous. You mean like hotel rendezvous with some guy while I'm at home taking care of our kids? Is that what you need, Diane? Her eyes darted away, unable to meet my gaze. She sat back down heavily, burying her face in her hands. It's not like that, she mumbled. Then explain it to me, I demanded, leaning forward. Tell me what it is. Because from where I'm standing, it sure as hell looks like you're cheating on me. She didn't answer right away. The room was silent except for the sound of her breathing, shallow and uneven. Finally, she looked up, her eyes red and filled with tears. I made a mistake, she said quietly. The words hit me like a freight train. Even though I'd been expecting it, hearing her admit it was a whole different level of pain. My hands clenched into fists, and I had to force myself to stay calm. A mistake, I repeated, my voice dangerously low. How long has this mistake been going on? She hesitated, and I could see the gears turning in her head, trying to calculate how much she could admit without completely destroying herself. It hasn't been long, she said finally. A few weeks, maybe. It didn't mean anything. Didn't mean anything? I echoed, my voice rising. You threw away 15 years of marriage for something that didn't mean anything? It wasn't like that, she protested. I didn't plan for this to happen. It just what? I interrupted, my anger boiling over. It just happened? You tripped and fell into a hotel room with him? Her face crumpled, and she started to cry. Big, dramatic sobs that might have moved me once but now felt hollow and manipulative. I'm sorry, she whispered. I don't know what else to say. I stared at her, disgusted and heartbroken all at once. This was the woman I'd built a life with, the person I thought I knew better than anyone else in the world. And now, sitting across from me, she was a stranger. Sorry doesn't cut it, Diane, I said finally. You don't get to wreck our family and then cry your way out of it. I didn't mean to wreck anything, she insisted, her voice rising. I made a mistake, but it's not too late to fix this. We can go to counseling, we can. Counseling? I interrupted, laughing bitterly. You think sitting in a room with some therapist is going to erase what you've done? Fix the lies, the betrayal? She flinched but didn't respond. Instead, she looked at me with those tear-filled eyes, silently begging for forgiveness. But I wasn't ready to forgive, not yet, and maybe not ever. I want the truth, I said, my voice steady but cold. All of it. Who is he? How long has this been going on? And why? Why the hell would you do this to me? To us? Diane hesitated, then took a shaky breath. His name is Matt, she said finally. We met at work. It started a couple of months ago. It wasn't supposed to be anything serious, I swear. I felt. I don't care how you felt, I snapped. I care about why you thought screwing around behind my back was the solution. She started crying again, and for a moment, I thought she might shut down completely. But then she said something that stopped me cold. I was unhappy, she said quietly. I didn't feel appreciated. I didn't feel loved. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her how ridiculous and selfish she sounded. But part of me couldn't ignore the tiny voice in my head, whispering that maybe, just maybe, I'd missed the signs. That I'd been so focused on providing for my family that I'd overlooked the cracks forming beneath the surface. But no. This wasn't my fault. Whatever issues we had, cheating was her choice. And now, we'd have to deal with the fallout. I sat across from Diane, my mind buzzing like an overworked machine. Her confession had left me in pieces, angry, hurt, and filled with a sense of betrayal I couldn't shake. But beneath all that was something else. A simmering resolve. She had taken a wrecking ball to the life we built together, and I wasn't going to let her walk away from this unscathed. Matt, I said finally, my voice cutting through her sobs. Tell me about him. How long have you been sneaking around? And I want the truth this time. Diane hesitated, her eyes darting toward the floor like a scolded child. It started a few months ago, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. At first, it was just flirting. I didn't think it would go anywhere. Flirting? I repeated, my tone sharp. So, what? He complimented your dress, and suddenly you're meeting him at hotels. Her face flushed with shame, but I didn't let up. I needed to hear it all, to fully understand the extent of her betrayal. He paid attention to me, she said, her voice trembling. He made me feel seen. Seen? I said, my voice rising. You have 2 kids and a husband who busts his ass every day to make sure you're happy and taken care of, and that wasn't enough for you? Tears streamed down her face, but I couldn't bring myself to feel pity. Not anymore. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't mean for this to happen. Stop saying that, I snapped. You meant for every part of it to happen. You chose to flirt. You chose to meet him. You chose to lie to me, to the girls, to everyone. Don't insult me by pretending this was some accident. She broke down again, burying her face in her hands. But her tears weren't going to fix this. Nothing would. For the next few days, we barely spoke. Diane tried to reach out, to plead her case, but I wasn't interested. The anger inside me had turned into something colder, more calculating. If she thought she could tear apart our family and walk away with her dignity intact, she was sorely mistaken. First, I started gathering evidence. If this was going to end in divorce, and it was, I needed to be prepared. I went through our finances, scoured her emails, and even checked the call logs on our shared phone plan. Every detail painted a clearer picture of just how long this had been going on and how brazen she'd been about it. The hotel receipts, late-night calls, and unexplained credit card charges all pointed to a woman who had stopped caring about consequences. But I wasn't done. I wanted Diane to feel the weight of what she'd done. To know that actions have consequences. So, I started planning my revenge. It began subtly. I didn't want Diane to suspect anything until it was too late. I reached out to a lawyer, a good one, and started the process of filing for divorce. Pennsylvania law was on my side. I made sure to document every shred of evidence of her infidelity, knowing it would give me the upper hand in court. Next, I spoke to a private investigator. I wanted more than just circumstantial evidence. I wanted proof that would make it impossible for her to deny anything. It wasn't cheap, but it was worth every penny when the PI handed me a file filled with photographs and detailed reports. There they were, Diane and Matt meeting at hotels, holding hands in public, acting like they didn't have a care in the world. Seeing the pictures made my blood boil, but it also solidified my resolve. While the legal wheels were turning, I started making changes around the house. I removed Diane from our joint bank accounts, transferred the utilities into my name, and made sure our home was legally protected as marital property. Diane didn't notice at first, she was too busy trying to fix things with me, as if we could ever go back to the way things were. The final piece of my plan involved the girls. I wasn't going to drag them into the mess Diane had created, but they deserved to know the truth eventually. For now, I made sure to spend as much time with them as possible. I took them out for ice cream, helped them with their homework, and stayed present in their lives. They were my anchor, the only thing keeping me grounded in the chaos. The confrontation I had been waiting for came 2 weeks later. Diane came home to find me sitting at the dining table, a stack of papers in front of me. Her face paled when she saw the folder, and I knew she understood what was happening. "What's this?" she asked, her voice shaky. "It's everything," I said simply. "The divorce papers. The evidence of your affair. Everything you've tried to hide." She opened the folder with trembling hands, her eyes scanning the pages. When she looked up at me, her face was a mixture of shock and horror. You've been spying on me?" "Spying?" I said, my voice cold. "You mean gathering proof that my wife has been cheating on me?" "Yeah, Diane. I've been spying." She started to cry again, but I didn't let it distract me. "You have two choices," I continued. "You can sign these papers and make this as painless as possible. Or you can fight me and drag this out, but I promise you, you won't like how it ends." Her hand shook as she held the papers, her tears falling onto the table. "I didn't want this," she whispered. "I never wanted this." "Then maybe you should have thought about that before you started sleeping with Matt," I said harshly. That night, Diane left to stay with her sister. The house felt emptier without her, but it also felt peaceful. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, there would be court battles, custody arrangements, and emotional fallout. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of control. The revenge wasn't just about punishing Diane. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my future. She had tried to destroy me, but in the end, it was her own lies that brought her down. 2 days after Diane moved out, I found myself sitting alone in the kitchen, staring at a cup of coffee I didn't feel like drinking. The house was eerily quiet. The girls were with my parents for the weekend, giving me time to think, to plan, and to prepare for what was coming next. Diane had called several times since she left. I hadn't answered. I didn't see the point. But when her name flashed on my screen again that morning, something told me it was time. Time to stop avoiding the inevitable. Time to have the conversation I'd been dreading. I picked up the phone. "Steve," she said, her voice tentative. "Thank you for answering. What do you want, Diane?" I asked, my tone as neutral as I could make it. "I need to talk to you," she said quickly. "Not over the phone. In person. Please." I hesitated, considering my options. Part of me wanted to tell her to go to hell, but another part of me, the part that still remembered the good years, the life we built, wanted to hear what she had to say. "Fine," I said finally. "Come by this afternoon." She arrived at 2 p.m. sharp. I watched from the window as she pulled into the driveway, stepping out of her car with a tentative, almost nervous energy. She was wearing a casual outfit, jeans and a sweater, but she looked tired, her usual polish dulled by the weight of everything that had happened. I opened the door before she could knock, stepping aside to let her in. "Let's talk," I said, leading her into the living room. She sat on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. I leaned against the armchair across from her, arms crossed, waiting for her to start. "I don't even know where to begin," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Try the truth," I said bluntly. She flinched but nodded. "You were right," she began. "About everything. About Matt. About the lies. I messed up, Steve. I know I did." "Messed up?" I repeated, my voice sharp. "That's putting it lightly." She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I know I hurt you. I know I broke our family. But I didn't plan for any of this to happen. I wasn't looking for an affair. That's not an excuse, I said coldly. You made a choice. Repeatedly. She nodded, tears filling her eyes. I know. I can't take it back. But I need you to understand why. Why? I said, incredulous. You think there's a why that makes this okay? No, she admitted, her voice trembling. But maybe it will help you understand. I've felt invisible, Steve. For years. Like I was just going through the motions. You were always working, always busy, and I felt like I was fading into the background. So you decided to cheat? I asked, my anger rising. You couldn't talk to me? You couldn't tell me how you were feeling? You had to go and blow up our entire life instead? I didn't want to hurt you, she said, her voice breaking. I didn't think it would go this far. And by the time I realized what I was doing, it was too late. You didn't want to hurt me? I repeated, laughing bitterly. Every time you lied to my face, every time you snuck around, you were hurting me. And the worst part is, you knew it. You knew what this would do to me, to the girls, and you did it anyway. She started crying, her shoulders shaking as she buried her face in her hands. But I didn't feel pity. Not this time. I'd run out of pity. I'm sorry, she choked out. I don't know what else to say. Sorry isn't enough, Diane, I said, my voice steady. It doesn't fix what you've done. She looked up at me, her tear-streaked face full of desperation. I want to fix this, she said. I want to go to counseling, to work on us. Please, Steve. Don't throw away 15 years over one mistake. One mistake? I said, my voice rising. This wasn't one mistake, Diane. This was months of lies, of deceit. This wasn't some one-night slip-up, this was a deliberate betrayal. She flinched at my words but didn't argue. I love you, she said finally. I know I've messed up, but I love you. I don't want to lose you. You already lost me, I said quietly. The moment you chose him over me, over our family, you lost me. Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might collapse under the weight of her grief. But then she straightened, her expression hardening. What about the girls? She asked. Are you going to rip their family apart because you can't forgive me? That hit a nerve, and she knew it. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. Don't you dare try to use them against me, I said, my voice low and dangerous. You don't get to play the victim here. This is on you, Diane. Not me. She looked away, her jaw tight, but she didn't respond. The silence between us was heavy, charged with years of anger, pain, and regret. I'm filing for divorce, I said finally, breaking the silence. It's done. I've already started the process. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked like she might argue. But then she nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. I figured as much, she said quietly. We'll work out custody arrangements, I continued. I want to keep things as stable as possible for the girls. But as far as we're concerned, this is over. She nodded again, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, she whispered one last time. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I stood up and walked out of the room, leaving her alone with her guilt. That evening, after Diane left, I sat down with the girls. I didn't tell them everything, just enough for them to understand that their mom and I were separating but that it wasn't their fault. Emily cried, while Sophie sat quietly, processing the news. It broke my heart to see them hurting, but I knew it was the right decision. Staying in a broken marriage would have hurt them even more in the long run. Diane texted me later, thanking me for being honest with the girls. I didn't reply. I didn't see the point. Our last conversation had made one thing clear, there was no going back. The house was quieter than it had ever been. Not the comforting kind of quiet that comes after a long day, but the heavy, suffocating silence that fills a space when something is missing. Diane's presence had been stripped from it, her laughter, her movements, even the scent of her perfume lingering in the air. What remained felt like a hollow shell of what my life used to be. And yet, for the first time in weeks, there was a strange sense of clarity. Diane officially moved her things out a week after our last conversation. The girls and I stayed at my parents' house that day because I didn't want them to see her come and go like a thief in the night. When we returned, it hit me hard, seeing the spaces where her belongings used to be, the empty side of the closet, the bare spot on the bathroom counter. I'd spent so much time being angry, hurt, and vengeful that I hadn't truly processed what it would feel like to have her gone. That first night alone in the house, I sat at the dining table and tried to make sense of everything. I stared at the divorce papers, now fully signed, and felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, anger, and unexpectedly, hope. This chapter of my life was over. That much was clear. But what came next was up to me. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of adjustments. Diane and I worked out a custody schedule for the girls, which was easier than I expected. To her credit, she didn't fight me on anything. She agreed to joint custody, with the girls spending weekdays with me and weekends with her. She even apologized again, though I could barely muster a response. At that point, words felt meaningless. The girls were struggling in their own ways. Emily, my older daughter, was quiet and withdrawn, spending hours in her room. Sophie, the younger one, was more vocal, asking questions I didn't always have answers to. "Why can't you and Mom just fix things?" she asked one night, her big brown eyes filled with confusion. I knelt in front of her, choosing my words carefully. "Sometimes, when two people hurt each other too much, it's hard to go back to the way things were," I said. "But that doesn't mean we don't love you and Emily. That will never change." She nodded slowly, but I could tell she didn't fully understand. How could she? At 11 years old, the world is supposed to be simple, not complicated by broken promises and shattered trust. At work, things were oddly normal. My co-workers, oblivious to the turmoil in my personal life, treated me the same as always. It was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it was nice to have a sense of routine. On the other hand, I often found myself staring blankly at my computer screen, the weight of everything pressing down on me. Tom, one of my closest friends at the office, eventually noticed. "You've been off lately," he said one afternoon, pulling up a chair beside me. "What's going on?" I hesitated. I hadn't told anyone about the divorce yet. But Tom had always been a good friend, steady, reliable, and unflinchingly honest. If anyone could handle the truth, it was him. "I'm getting a divorce," I said finally, the words feeling strange on my tongue. Tom's eyebrows shot up, but he didn't push. "Damn," he said quietly. "I'm sorry, man." "What happened?" "She cheated," I said bluntly. 4 months. Tom let out a low whistle. "That's rough," he said. "You holding up okay?" I shrugged. "I don't know," I admitted. "Some days, I feel fine. Other days, it feels like I'm drowning. But I'll get through it." "You will," he said firmly. "And if you need anything at all, you let me know." As the weeks turned into months, I began to find my footing again. I threw myself into being a dad, focusing on the girls and making sure they felt loved and supported. I started cooking more, teaching Emily how to make pasta from scratch and letting Sophie pick out ridiculous toppings for homemade pizzas. We had movie nights, board game marathons, and long talks about their hopes and fears. Slowly but surely, the house began to feel like a home again. Therapy helped, too. I started going a few weeks after Diane moved out, at the recommendation of my lawyer. I wasn't thrilled about the idea at first, sitting in a room with a stranger, bearing my soul. But it turned out to be exactly what I needed. My therapist, a no-nonsense woman named Claire, didn't let me wallow in self-pity. She pushed me to confront the hard truths, to acknowledge my pain without letting it define me. "What do you want your life to look like a year from now?" she asked me during one session. The question caught me off guard. For so long, I'd been focused on surviving the present that I hadn't thought about the future. But as I sat there, staring at the ceiling, a vision began to take shape. I wanted stability. Happiness. A life where my daughters felt secure and loved, where I could look in the mirror and feel proud of the man staring back. Diane and I eventually found a rhythm. We weren't friends, not even close, but we managed to co-parent without too much drama. She seemed genuinely remorseful, though I never fully trusted her again. We spoke only when necessary, sticking to the logistics of raising 2 kids. The girls adjusted in their own ways. Emily started opening up more, joining the school theater club and finding solace in performing. Sophie channeled her energy into soccer, spending hours practicing in the backyard. Watching them thrive despite everything gave me a sense of pride and relief. Maybe, just maybe, we were going to be okay. One night, after the girls were asleep, I sat in the living room with a glass of whiskey, reflecting on the past year. It had been hell. There was no denying that. But it had also been a lesson about resilience, about forgiveness, and about the kind of man I wanted to be. I wasn't the same person I'd been before Diane's betrayal. I was stronger, more self-aware, and determined to build a better life for myself and my daughters. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Life moves on. People heal. And while I couldn't change the past, I could control my future. And that's exactly what I intended to do.